This stunning young woman owned an ice cream parlor in Austria. However, what was found in the basement of her shop would lead to the brutal loss of many lives, and a terrifying true story for those living in the country's capital, Vienna. There's nothing more innocent than an ice cream, a sweet treat that reminds us of family holidays and hot summers. Well, the story of Estibaliz Carranza is far from sweet, though the ice coldness of this woman's heart does rival that of a cone of Breyers. This case is another prime example that people should never judge a book by its cover, or a killer by what delicious treats they sell for a living. Welcome back to Twisted Minds. My name's James, and today we're going to look at one of the most beautiful, but one of the most sickening killers we have covered on this channel. This is the story of Estibaliz Carranza, aka the Ice Cream Killer. Estibaliz Carranza was born in Mexico City and moved to Spain with her family when she was just 5 years old, growing up in Catalana city of Barcelona. Her father, Armando Lopez, is something of a celebrity in Spain, known for his books on shamanism. Now, according to Estibaliz, her father was a controlling man who she began building murder fantasies about from an extremely young age. This was the seed of evil that continued to grow for years, until Estibaliz's dark side sprouted and destroyed the lives of so many people. During her young adulthood while studying, she was in a 5-year relationship with a man who regarded her as property, a personality trait that she had already suffered through during her childhood. The relationship ended after she finished her studies, as the boyfriend told her he wasn't looking for a serious relationship, despite already having proposed to her. Talk about head games. This began a new string of murderous thoughts, now directed at her ex-boyfriend. In fact, she even considered cutting his brakes as payback for the breakup. You break my heart, I break all your bones. That doesn't sound like a fair trade to me. Shortly after her studies, Carranza quickly left Spain and moved to Germany instead. She lived in Munich for a little while, working as an au pair, which is pretty much helper from a foreign country working for and living as part of a host family. After her stint as an au pair, she got herself a job at an ice cream shop in a village near Nuremberg. It was during this time she met Holger Holz, who she later began dating. In 2002, the two finally got married and moved to his hometown of Berlin, where she held various jobs. A short time after the wedding, the dark side of Holz came out. He began taking all the money Carranza earned as a waitress and stole the papers that would allow her to return to Spain. For the third time in her life, she was in the clutches of a control freak who took advantage of her every move. It was also said that he would exploit her physically and mentally if she didn't do things his way. She eventually returned to the ice cream shop, but this time she was humiliated and controlled by her boss, even refused basic human rights like going to the bathroom. This mistreatment had led her murderous fantasies running wild. Luckily for her boss, these fantasies remained just that, dark thoughts in her head that gave her a sense of control and justice. But all that was about to change, as a puppet can only be yanked around so much before a string snaps. In 2005, Carranza and Holz moved to Vienna, where they opened up an ice cream parlor in Ostwaldgasse. Although this was supposed to be a partnership, Holz took most of the profits. Profits he would use to fund his new investment in firearms and shooting video games. Carranza eventually fell out of love with the controlling man and began a relationship with Manfred Hinterberg, an ice cream machine salesman. It looks like Carranza definitely had a type. If a man knew how to keep a Sorello frozen, they were in. On the 17th of April 2008, Carranza finished her shift in the ice cream shop and returned to her apartment, where she was still living with Holz, because living with an ex isn't a recipe for disaster. Throughout that evening, her ex-husband berated her with insults, just like he had done for years. This time, however, things had changed. As Holz had turned his back while playing video games, Carranza took a Beretta pistol that was kept at the apartment and pulled the trigger. 2 bullets went through his skull, with a final one going through his temple, ending his life. So why, after all of these years of abuse, did Carranza finally snap that night? Could insults really drive a person to commit murder? Well, there were other reasons. You see, she was desperate to get out of the shared apartment and owed thousands to Holz, which would have cost her the ice cream business to repay. That was something she wasn't willing to part with. Oh, and by the way, I'm not excusing any of this psychotic behavior. Trauma and hardship should never lead to taking one's life. I think that goes without saying. Anyway, she was now out of the debt and had the place to herself, but had an even bigger problem: the body of her ex in her apartment. She first tried to burn the body in the apartment, but the smoke and stench were too much. She then came up with another idea and brought a chainsaw. I think you see where this is going, right? She took chunks of flesh and put them in the freezer, no doubt next to the chunky monkey and cookie dough. When she was forced to leave the apartment in autumn 2008, she had to remove the parts of the body, of course. She decided to put the pieces in ice cream tubs and fill them with concrete. She did this with all the pieces except for the head, which had frozen at the bottom of the freezer, like a forgotten bag of peas. Her solution to this was to also fill the freezer with concrete. She then took the concrete-filled ice cream tubs and hid them in the cellar of her shop and got 2 friends to move the freezer to a storage unit. When people asked about Holz, Carranza told them that he had moved to India, and they actually believed her. Carranza met Manfred Hinterberg from Austria. Hinterberg invested more money into the ice cream shop, but as is the running theme in this story, he turned out to be a jerk. He would often sleep with other women who controlled and took money from him. This wasn't the case for Carranza, however, who once again got pushed around by her love. This time though, she was forced into getting cosmetic surgery, such as a nose reduction, a facelift, and lip injections, as Hinterberg found them too thin. The final straw was when he insisted he didn't want any children with her, as he already had some in another relationship. Completely heartbroken and hopeless, Carranza was pushed to her limits once again. Estibaliz learned from her mistakes in the first murder. She practiced her aim at the shooting range and planned to cover the floor and walls with plastic sheets to stop the room from getting messy after pulling the trigger. It was on the night of the 21st of November 2010. After the 2 returned home from a trip, the planned murder took place. Carranza waited for Hinterberg to fall asleep before quietly applying plastic sheeting. She then placed the weapon to the back of his head and pulled the trigger 4 times. Carranza then used her tried and tested method of chopping up the body with a chainsaw and sealing them in concrete ice cream tubs, giving Holz a new roommate in the cellar. This time, however, Hinterberg's disappearance didn't go unnoticed, and after many people asked about him, Carranza decided to report him missing 4 days later. Now, the Carranza's ice cream parlor was part of the same building that housed other shops. On June 6, 2011, a pipe had burst. Workers discovered ice cream tubs and concrete-filled fridges that Carranza had moved there. In a grisly discovery, the leg of Hinterberg was sticking out of one of the tubs, which led the police to the rest of the human remains. The next day, on June 7, 2011, Carranza was approached by her neighbor in her ice cream parlor about the discovery. She was suspicious that the remains had belonged to Manfred Hinterberg, which freaked Carranza out. She emptied her bank account and safe deposit box, let her familiar cleaner fetch her passport and passbook, and rushed to the airport. Although she had bought a ticket for Paris, she left the airport, scared that the police would board the flight and arrest her. Her suspicions turned out to be correct, as the police were waiting at the gate. After the narrow escape, she checked into a guest house in Tolmezzo and left the next day, evading the Italian police. At this point, Carranza's fear was getting the best of her. She decided to stay the night with a street artist she had just met and begun telling him about her suicidal thoughts. She later began talking about the body parts that were discovered, which led to him calling the police. At 7:30 a.m. on June 10, 2011, the police caught up with Carranza and had her extradited to Austria. While this was going on, the body parts of Manfred Hinterberg and Holger Holz had been successfully identified. She immediately admitted to the crimes, and she explained how she had chopped them up and set them in ice cream tubs, making the opposite of soft scoop. The Austrian and Spanish media had a field day with this story, with some of them speculating that someone else must have helped her with the murders and disembodiment, as she was only small. But I disagree. Anyone who has ever worked in an ice cream parlor will know that you need an arm of steel to continuously scoop out frozen ice cream. Carranza never admitted that anyone helped her in the murders, and only explained how she would get unsuspecting friends to help her shift the concrete-filled freezers. In a psychiatrist report, Carranza was deemed particularly dangerous, and she was basically accountable during her actions. She was also diagnosed with a serious personality disorder, with a psychiatrist sharing their opinion that if she was ever let out again, it would almost certainly end with Carranza dusting off the old chainsaw. They explained how she often got herself in situations where she was the submissive in the relationship, a position she would grow tired of and want to escape. She would then use the feelings of being trapped and abused to validate the murders. As far as she was concerned, they deserved it. On the 5th of September 2012, the Vienna public prosecutor charged Estibaliz Carranza with the murder of Holger Holz and Manfred Hinterberg. She was sent to an institution while the trial concluded. During this time, she was described as a quote-unquote downright cold-bloodedness and unscrupulousness woman, who showed no remorse for her actions. When questioned during the trial, this monster defended herself by saying, "If I burst into tears, what would you say? What kind of theater is that? What I did is disgusting. I try to pull myself together and take the blame." The trial was cut and dry, with the killer never once trying to defend her actions. In fact, her coldness disturbed many involved. The guilty verdict was reached on November 22, 2012, which handed her a life sentence for double murder. In prison, Carranza began building a brand for herself, something that the media and those with morbid curiosity ate up. Everyone wanted to know about this beautiful woman capable of killing and butchering people, men that she once claimed to love. In August 2016, Carranza was moved from the lower Austrian women's prison in Schwanza to the upper Asten prison in Upper Austria. The reason for the relocation was due to two inmates who wanted to kill Carranza. In a bizarre twist of fate, Carranza, who had been desperate to have a child, discovered that she was pregnant by her new special friend, Ronald R., on the morning that she was arrested. The baby was born on January 11, 2012, and was given to the father, who she later married. Not one to hold down a relationship, the pair split 6 months later. Estibaliz Carranza has since been transferred to an all-male prison in Schwanza, Lower Austria, because she is deemed far too dangerous to be locked up with other women at the facility. I don't know about you guys, but putting one female in an all-male prison probably sounds like an awful idea, especially one of the most attractive killers of all time. But after looking at her victim of choice, I think it's the men that should be more scared in this arrangement. In another book written by the ice cream killer, she admitted to having a relationship with another inmate, Martin L. Let's just hope that prison officers don't let the pair do a workshop class together. Martin might not come out there in one piece. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of Estibaliz Carranza. And oh, why don't you go and click on one of the videos below to watch another one of our videos.